Hello and welcome to Press TV's news analysis coming to you from Tehran. Thanks so much for being with us. Well, the Occupy movement, which was started in New York aimed at Wall Street, is gaining momentum. Now, there are many grievances by protesters who are tired of the top echelons of the society reaping all the benefits and the majority bearing the burden of the taxes, wars, no jobs, and foreclosures.
The U.S. police violently arresting an anti-Wall Street protester in Portland, Oregon. Dozens of people have been detained in the city for refusing to end their rallies. A large number of demonstrators have been arrested in other parts of the U.S., from Denver in Colorado to Nashville in Tennessee. New York's freezing temperatures have failed to stop anti-Wall Street demonstrations, with the protesters saying their movement will not die down.
The spirit is not going to die. This is just the start of the movement. The movement is going to keep going. Winter, rain, shine or cold, we're going to be out here to make sure this works.
I mean, it's beautiful, though, and seeing everybody come out. I mean, it's snow, and it's brutal, and it's cold, and my feet are cold, and I've only been outside maybe 45 minutes an hour. And the fact that people are staying out here in this weather, I find is amazing.
I think it's going to actually grow. Already I'm noticing people are handing out hand warmers, socks, ponchos.
The demonstrators condemn capitalism and accuse Washington of serving the interests of the rich, that they say constitute only 1% of the U.S. population. On many occasions, the protests turned into anti-war rallies. The Americans have political concerns as well. Recent polls show many of them no longer trust neither the Democrats nor the Republicans. They express disdain for the performance and policies of both parties. A new Gallup survey has found that a majority of Americans believe that it is time their country had a third political party.
I'd like to welcome my guest to the program, the founder of thiscan'tbehappening.net, Mr. Charles M. Young from New York, and from Crescent and Cross Solidarity movement, Mr. Mark Glenn from Washington. Thank you both for being with us. Let's start it off in New York with Mr. Young. Now, do you think that the demonstrators are becoming more focused on what exactly they want?
Well, I think what they're focused on is getting community support. They are, sending organizers out to speak to community groups and churches and things all over the New York area. And, they know that if this demonstration is to continue, that they need the support of the people around there. As far as getting their demands focused, that's clear enough. They're sick of the way that Wall Street works. And there is this growing realization in the United States that Wall Street is run by crooks, and the managerial class in Washington is a bunch of crooks, and the rest of us are going to have to do something about it if we're going to have an economic system that works for everybody.
Well, now, Mark,
it's pretty simple. I mean, I don't think the demands are a big problem.
Well, you don't think the demands are a big problem, but let's say, for example, let's look at it, what you just said, frustrated with Wall Street and the corruption in general that is taking place has taken place in the financial market. But what do they want instead? Do they have concrete goals as to how to solve the problem?
Well, the people in Zuccotti Park are quite a mixture. I mean, some of them are what I would call honest liberals. People who have been appalled by the performance of Barack Obama while he's president, and but they're not particularly revolutionary in what they want to come out of this. But they're also anarchists and socialists and Marxists, and there's a very lively conversation going on in that park. I mean, to me, it's the most entertaining place to be in New York City. Whenever I go down there, I have the most incredibly stimulating, intelligent conversations with people that I've never met before. And that's the important thing, is this dialogue, not the demands. But the absolute minimum that the demands would be recognition that the world economic collapse that happened in 2008 was the result of a crime. It wasn't just greed. It wasn't just an act of God, and it wasn't an economic cycle.
Okay.
It was the FBI warned about mortgage securities fraud in 2004. There were warnings from the Justice Department as well. But absolutely nobody has gone to prison for this. I mean, trillions of dollars were stolen. Trillions of dollars were of wealth owned by the middle class in the United States, which just disappeared. And people are very, very angry about that. And the government is doing nothing to address this situation.
Okay, well, let me turn to Mark Glenn. Let me turn to Washington and get Mark Glenn on this. What Charles Young has just said, basically, that the government is doing nothing to address this situation. Do you agree with what he said? And if it is the case, why isn't the government doing anything to address this situation?
I agree in the sense that the government is not doing anything, but the reason the government is not doing anything is because the government works for the same people who are responsible for doing this. Let's not forget that it was extreme financial interests that were responsible for Barack Obama's election in 2008. He was elected, his largest campaign supporter was Goldman Sachs. So what is our chief executive officer of this political union going to do? He's not going to bite the hand that feeds him. He can do a few things in order to make it appear as though he's addressing the problem. But the fact of the matter is that he's basically continuing with the same fiscal and foreign policies, that his predecessor had instigated and had enforced. So this is the thing. It is a systemic problem that goes back not just to 2008 or to the year 2000 when George Bush was elected. The fact of the matter is that we do have a group of characters who insist upon remaining back behind the curtains, shouting lines on stage to whoever happens to be out there at that particular moment. And so the person on the stage is the one who gets all the tomatoes thrown at him and all of the booing. But the fact of the matter is that he's just an actor reading from a script. The government, in essence, cannot do anything about this because the government is not a servant of the people. It is a servant of these same rich, elitist corporate interests responsible for not just destroying the world economy, but really destroying world peace.
So what does that mean, though, Mark? What does that mean exactly when you say that there are entities that are behind the curtain, let's say? Are you saying it doesn't matter if a Republican becomes president or a Democrat becomes president? Basically, they really have no control of how they determine the direction of the country.
That is essentially correct. We have not had an independent presidency since at least the days of John F. Kennedy. We have all had presidents who have been on the payroll to these very powerful private corporate interests. And so it doesn't matter. It could be a Republican, it could be a Democrat, it could even be a third party. The fact of the matter is that we have a mafia-type system running things. And these chief executive officers that we commonly refer to as presidents, and let's just be honest, it's not just Barack Obama. It is a systemic problem that works its way all the way down through the Congress and through the judiciary. They're not going to do anything because these are company men. There is a contract, either spoken or unspoken, that is in effect here between those who have put these men in office and the men themselves, men and women, and they're not going to go against it because they know that there will be hell to pay if they do, and I do mean that in the literal sense. Okay, well, Charles Young, do you agree with Mark Glenn's analysis? And if so, where does that leave, let's say, the next election, as far as a presidential election? Do you think that it makes a difference who gets elected as president in the United States? And if the majority of people are saying no to the Democrats and no to the Republicans at this point in time, what direction do you see this next election taking?
Well, I absolutely agree with what Mark just said. I would just add to his analysis that as recently as the first Bush administration in 1988, there was something called the savings and loan scandal, which at that time was the biggest financial scandal in American history, probably world history. And at that time, the Justice Department put over 1,000 crooks, bankers, in jail, sent them to prison. Really powerful, rich people, over 1,000 of them went to prison. And there were 10,000 referrals, people who were investigated. And there hasn't been, in the present scandal, which is vastly worse, I mean, trillions and trillions of dollars have just either been thrown into the ocean or outright stolen. Not a single person has gone to prison or even been indicted. Obama is more in the back pocket of Wall Street than the first George Bush. I mean, there has been this process of deregulation in the United States since the savings and loan scandal in the 90s and in the past decade, where pretty much all the rules were taken away and the economy was put in the hands of anti-regulators. And that has been a catastrophe, and changing that is the absolute minimum demand that this movement is making.
Well, now Charles Young, let me just jump in here with what you just said, as far as Obama even being worse in certain situations than his predecessor. What about all the sayings or the slogans about change and for the people? Was it all just a farce, or what is it exactly?
Well, the answer to that question is yes. It was fraud. It's just a presidential election in the United States is two modestly competing propaganda systems, for getting the most votes for a particular branch of the managerial class. It doesn't amount to very much. What amounts to a lot is the fact that the American people are finally putting pressure on the Democratic Party from the left. That is one of the most important things in these demonstrations is that since the anti-war movement folded in the 1970s, there has been no pressure from the left put on the Democratic Party. As a result, they have become less and less distinguishable from the Republicans. I mean, it used to be that the Democrats wanted bigger crumbs to fall off the banquet table, for the poor who are eating off the floor. But now it's the Republicans and Democrats are basically in agreement about that, that the poor should get very few crumbs and everyone should suffer so that the rich can continue to dine at the banquet table.
Okay.
And the rest of us who are out there protesting are saying that this is wrong, and it doesn't really matter very much the presidential election coming up. What matters is that this movement continue to put pressure on both political parties to address these fundamental problems.
Okay, now let me turn to Mark and look a little bit more at the demonstrations themselves. Now, there was a violent crackdown in Oakland, California last week, and we saw veteran Scott Olson being severely wounded by police. How ironic is it for the police to have responded so violently when the police themselves are actually part of the 99%?
Yes, but this has always been the case. It doesn't matter what period of history that we're talking about, what type of system of government may be in place at the time. The palace guards are always going to do what the head honcho tells them to do, even if it means attacking their own people. We really don't need to use this as solitary proof of the irony of the fact that the rich and the powerful always manage to get people to turn on their own. So this is, of course, there is a particular irony to this in the fact that this was a wounded veteran from the Iraq War who is protesting based upon the fact that he has come home and found his country in shambles in similar circumstances to what no doubt he witnessed when he was in Iraq. Iraq, of course, was destroyed deliberately by having these bombs dropped on it, and the United States has been deliberately destroyed as well economically by having these time bombs go off that have robbed the people of their economic infrastructure. So irony is never in short supply, particularly when you're dealing with people who are organically greedy and evil. It's just irony is just the natural ebb and flow of the events that they help create. I would like to address one quick thing that my colleague had discussed earlier, which is the direction of the protests themselves. You know, I certainly support and cheer on the people who are on the streets, but I think that we have to temper our optimism about what the likely outcome of this is going to be.
Why is that?
We have these things known as controlled demolitions, and these controlled demolitions have to be done. A lot of planning has to take place, a lot of preparation in order for this thing to come down peacefully. And so it's the same thing with revolutions. You know, it's not just angry people going out in the street and then all of a sudden the system comes crashing down. It isn't going to be that way. I would encourage those who are on the streets and who are genuinely protesting the suffering that they're going through, that they need to look at the systemic problems of this, one of which is the fact, of course, that we have spent ourselves into bankruptcy fighting these wars that are of absolutely no interest to the American people. I mean, when George Bush got up and made that stupid speech that he did in the aftermath of 9/11, talking about a crusade against 1.5 billion people that may last as long as a century, what did the American people think was going to happen as a result of this? That everybody was going to get rich by going to war against 1.5 billion people?
Okay.
So I would encourage my fellow Americans to start looking at the systemic problems that we're dealing with. Otherwise, we're going to be out in the streets protesting until the proverbial cows come home and nothing of any substance is going to change.
All right, let me turn to San Francisco and welcome another guest of ours from the Institute for Policy Studies, Mr. Saul Lando. Thanks so much for being with us. Now, how do you see it? Our guests basically been talking about the failure of the American system. Now, I want to look at from the American people perspective. What has taken so long with everything that has been talked about on the program? Why did it take so long, in your perspective, for the Americans to take to the streets? And do you think that they will reach a point where they will be getting something from their efforts? And thanks so much for joining us, sir.
Well, I think that one of the problems has been that there is no negotiating process here. There's no method by which the American people can now take their grievances and turn them into effective demands. In other words, there's no channels to mediate. There's no political party now that represents the demands of many, many millions of people. We have watched, all of us around the world, as a small group of people have appropriated the lion's share of the wealth of the world and have appropriated, if you like, the commons. Those elements that have been, since Pericles at least, defined as common to all of us: the earth, the fire, the air, and the water. And I think the word in Spanish is indignados, right? The people who took to the streets in Spain are called the indignant ones. That is, their dignity has been affronted. And this has been what has, I think, forced people out. There's nowhere else to turn. The American dream, that idea that you'll have a home, a job, and a car, well, that's still available to you, but when you sleep, not when you're awake. And here are people with master's degrees and other kinds of advanced college degrees and have no jobs and no chance to get them. Their housing has become precarious. There's almost 11 million people now on the verge of foreclosure in the United States. This is becoming a rather desperate population, and it's spreading. And people feel that their dignity has been affronted. And naturally, the police have, in certain places, like Oakland, behaved as, predictably, I guess, and firing a tear gas grenade and fracturing the skull of an Iraq war veteran. In New York, one former veteran stood up and said, "What are you people doing? The people, the protesters, the people who are occupying all these cities are not armed. They're not threatening violence. and yet the police behave as if these people are somehow unruly. And of course, crime is now increasing in some of these cities because the police are deployed there where there's no threat to property or people. So what's happening is the American people, I think, or some of them, have awakened to this enormous, monstrous wealth gap of 325 to 1 between the CEO and the bottom worker. Now, this is a wealth gap that outdoes even those of the fabled dictatorships of the third world. And it's becoming, obscene.
Now, Mr. Landau, we don't have very much time left because you unfortunately joined us late. But what does it take? Do you see this movement? Where do you see it going? Can these Occupy protests go from a movement to a revolution?
Well, I don't think it's a movement. It's a prolonged moment. A movement has specific demands. Give us civil rights, the vote, or get out of Vietnam. These are movements, and they have demands, and those demands can be satisfied when the government accedes to them. This is still a prolonged moment of people expressing their indignation and stating, if you like, general complaints about the treatment given to bankers and Wall Street sleaze, while poor people are given, if you like, the raw end of the deal. This has not yet become a movement. From a movement, it might develop into a politics, but that will take time, and we'll see. At this point, I'm encouraged by the fact that people are getting away from their computer screens, getting away from their depressions, and getting out into the streets and mixing up with other people and practicing democracy in a very real way.
Well, do the Americans have what it takes, Mr. Landau? We're almost out of time, but it's very cold now in the Northeast. Will they be able to sustain, as you say, this moment?
Well, I don't know if people will be able to sustain it. They may have to go and find better shelter during the cold storm, but then they'll return, I think, and they'll be back again. And even if they are driven out for a month or 2 months during the winter, this isn't going to go away until something fundamental changes in the way this government is running, the way this economy is running, and the way wealth is really apportioned throughout the population in the most unequal way that we've had since the Gilded Age over 100 years ago. Something has got to change in this country, and it's the economy and it's the political system that have become dysfunctional. While we waste our money with stupid wars and stupid military activities and stupid military production, we are dying as a country. Our infrastructure is eroding. And if somebody doesn't wake up and get out of this state of denial, there's going to be more and more people pouring out into the streets throughout this country and
all right. Well, thank you. I am so sorry, but I'd like to thank all of you for being with us. Hopefully we'll do this on another program here, the News Analysis. Thank you, Mr. Charles M. Young, founder of thiscan'tbehappening.net from New York, and from San Francisco Institute for Policy Studies, Mr. Saul Landau, and from Crescent and Cross Solidarity Movement, Mr. Mark Glenn in Washington. And viewers, as always, we thank you for joining us. Another close-up look at today's top stories. Join us same place, same time tomorrow. I'm Marzi Hashemi signing out for myself and the whole crew here in Tehran. Thank you and goodbye.